digital world, Spliced In Later is back once again. How are you going, everyone? I hope everyone is doing okay. I hope we're all pulling together and doing what we're doing to keep on keeping on with everything going on. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode. I know it was a long one. I'd like to thank everybody who listened to it from start to finish. That would have been a slog. I hope it was interesting, but it is very daunting to see a new episode of something be 47 minutes long. We don't often have a spare 47 minutes. But even if you put me on double speed, even if you put me on in the background while you did something else, even if you just played it and went away, it still registered that something was happening. So I appreciate everybody, however you did it. I enjoyed doing it. Nothing beats a good list. Marvel, I've been waiting to list that for a while. Can always get a lot of content out of lists, making for nice detailed episodes, covering a lot of bases. I'm sure in a month's time we'll be back for another list, probably a top 10 of a particular year. But for now, let's bring things down a bit. Let's make it a bit more simple. Let's just discuss a brief topic with a couple of movies for examination. Same stuff we normally do here at Spliced In Later, while we wait for the ability to go see new movies and review them as per the usual. Now today's topic, like most of the topics on Spliced In Later, I did only come up with about 24 hours ago. I was trying to think, what can I discuss which isn't in relation to something I've done in the past? Because I thought it would be fun to jump on my YouTube channel. If you are listening from YouTube, if you go, it's like I did a bit of spring cleaning. I did a bit of tidying up of all my videos, and everything's been sorted into playlists. And I noticed patterns. Namely, there's a lot of Star Wars, Terminator's come up a couple of times, James Bond, top 10s, and a lot of the episodes are starting to be the same sort of thing quite frequently. Maybe not the exact same thing, not intentionally, but when you've only been doing a podcast for 6 months and you realize that at least 4 or 5 of your episodes have been about Star Wars, you have to think, hang on, this is a movie channel and we've got to talk about movies. And we can't just talk about the same movies that I want to talk about. We've got to talk on a wider scale, which is why I thought I'd delve into a place I don't really like being. Makes me uncomfortable, scared, paranoid, uneasy. But let's look at the infamous horror movie. Now, if you are a frequent listener to this podcast and to these episodes, you might be surprised. You might be wondering why I'm going into this topic when I've said on multiple occasions, whether it's been relevant to the topic or not, how much I am not a fan of horror films, and the worst thing that anyone can do is try and force me to watch horror films, something that my friends are constantly trying to make me do over and over again. And not just movies, scary stuff in general. There's a game called Alien Isolation, which I'm being hunted down to play, and I know what's in it, I know what it details, I know how I'm going to feel playing it, and it is a huge no from me, but I'm being persecuted. So we'll see how we go. Maybe I'll come back one day and tell you my experience if I do ever have to play that game, but quite likely I'll be dead. But as I've tried to get into more of the swing of movies in general and accept all genres, thrillers, comedies, dramas, superheroes, sci-fi, everything, it's been easier for me to hammer home exactly what it is I don't like and why it has not ruined my opinion of horror films, but made me wary of the whole concept. I think there are two types of horror films. There is the horror film which we are getting nowadays, which relies completely on the jump scare or torture porn or something like that, where loud noises, bangs, and over-the-top imagery, blood and gore is just designed to make you feel uncomfortable, to get that adrenaline spiked to a point where you panic and you can't handle what you're seeing. Now, some people may crave this adrenaline rush. I do not. And unfortunately, as I was growing up in my youth, we're heading into high school, to college, you're going out to the movies with your friends. There are a lot of people out there that do enjoy that type of cinema, and albeit to them, I've got nothing against the people enjoying these movies. I don't want them to make me watch these movies, but I've got nothing against them. However, as we go forward, in 2020 we're up to now, it seems to be that the horror film, in most cases, has devolved into that. Or more importantly, just making as many horror films as you can with as many jump scares, freaky imagery, blood and guts, coming out constantly from all different art productions, Blumhouse Entertainment, all that stuff, to a point where what really is a horror film, in my opinion, and what type of horror film I will allow myself to watch and admit with my hat in my hands that I enjoy, is the horror movie designed to creep you out, to disturb you, to scare you in a different way. Now, what do I mean when I say a different way? What I mean is, as I've said before, jumping out and going boo at someone, it's scaring someone, but in the most basic sense. You haven't creeped anybody out, you haven't disturbed anybody, you've just startled them. Anybody can watch a movie where a big ogre can be hiding in a corner and you know it's coming, you can sort of sense it's coming because you've seen enough of this stuff to get that a jump scare is coming, but still just the loud noise combined with the shout and the scream is not okay. In my opinion, I don't like it, and that's all on me. It's my problem, I have to deal with it. But to say that all horror films are like that is a shame, because while we're getting that today, there were some horror films in the past when films were becoming a thing that weren't this. Horror films didn't start out as jump scare, blood and guts, blah, sort of thing. I'm reading my 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die book, and looking back in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, when horror was becoming a thing, it was creepy imagery, unsettling stories, which made you walk away and think how upset you were by what you had seen, how it's hard to sleep at night because you're thinking about the images and themes that you had seen. Not you can't sleep because someone said boo to you and you're worried that in the dark someone might say boo to you again. Examples of these, you go back as far as Night of the Living Dead by George Romero, the early days with the monsters as Frankenstein, Dracula, all good movies with essence of what would become the horror symbols that we see today: vampires, werewolves, zombies, everything like that. And in today's times, there are good horror films that are hidden amongst the droves and droves of jump scare pariahs. I hear Hereditary is good. I may not see it because I'm scared, but I can admit that Hereditary is probably a good movie, because while there's probably jump scares in it, the actual story itself of what's going on, I won't say what's going on because I don't want to spoil it in case you do want to subject yourself to this, sounds like a good movie. Also, in essence, A Quiet Place. A Quiet Place is one of the few horror films that I do in fact own, and I will admit that I enjoy. That one's an interesting concept because there are jump scares, but in essence to the story itself, because there's such a lack of sound for the whole movie. So you are scared because you don't know what it is that you're being scared by. Sure, something is startling you, but you don't know what it is. And you're learning about this world and this universe that A Quiet Place is set up for you. And that's the intriguing part. While we're keeping our episode nice and short today, I'm just going to dive into 3 films that I think are what is a good horror film and what I will allow myself to watch, and what I think is a better explanation of why horror as a genre is probably good compared to what we're getting right now. There's sort of middle tier. We've got a movie back in the 60s, we've got another one in the 70s and 80s, and then we've got another one that came out quite recently, and is probably the one that I owe the most for allowing my mind to be opened up about horror films. So let's begin. The first film I'm going to talk about is Psycho. Now, Psycho, obviously, directed by Alfred Hitchcock in the 1960s. We all know Psycho. We all have seen the infamous shower scene. I never wanted to watch Psycho because of my fear of horror films, but because Psycho was on my poster of the 100 movies I have to see, bucket list, I had no choice. I gave myself a task. I had to do it. And as I was watching Psycho, that's when I started to realize that maybe there was more to horror films than I realized. The infamous shower scene that we see, that you've all seen before you've seen this movie, is probably the most intense, violent part of the movie. And of course, as we're in 2020 and we've seen Game of Thrones and everything else where the violence and everything has just been upped 1,000, it's pretty tame by today's standards. What's interesting about Psycho is, even though I know that that moment happens in the movie, I didn't know the basis of what was around it. I knew essences of it because I've just been in the movie world. But watching it, even sort of knowing where the direction was going, there's a sense of uneasiness watching the movie. Right off the bat, you're watching Janet Leigh, who is I would say the half star of this movie, make a terrible decision where she up and steals some money from her boss and flees. A lot of the movie, before you even get to the psycho stuff, is her driving along with this money, and she keeps seeing police officers everywhere. She has to pull over to get her car fixed because it's got some faulty issues, and cops are starting to appear, and time is progressing further and further since she up and left with this money, and you know that eventually things are going to start to catch on. That, in essence, is what I think is great about a horror film, that scent of unease. Probably why a horror mixed with thriller is probably my take on what I would enjoy in a horror film. It's waiting for the penny to drop, essentially. Even the money part aside, you know eventually she's going to get to a point where the psycho stuff's about to happen. So it's just waiting. And the movie takes its time to get you to that point. When she gets to the Bates Motel and she meets Norman Bates, who owns the motel, and immediately you can sense that there's something off about this guy, but you're not quite sure. He seems amicable enough. They strike up some great conversations. Some of the best dialogue I've ever heard in a movie is in Psycho, where they just talk to each other just about stuff. Norman Bates talks about his life. Janet Leigh talks about, I don't know, whatever's going on in her life. Obviously, I took more away from Norman Bates than Janet Leigh, because Janet Leigh is in fact the actress's name, and I do not remember the name of her character in the movie, and I apologize for that. I thought maybe I could have a quick look and see what it was before I continue with this episode, but I've said Janet Leigh too many times. We're just going to accept it, and we're going to move on. Then we progress in, and we start getting the infamous shower scene, the murders, the mystery to solve. What's happening to these people? How is Norman Bates involved? Who's pulling the strings? What's going on? If you haven't seen Psycho and you don't know what it's about, I won't spoil it, because I can imagine seeing this movie for the first time and getting the big reveal would be pretty impressive and amazing to watch. If you've made it this point in life and you haven't been spoiled, hats off to you. It's the infamous spoil for movies that have been around for ages, which is just common knowledge. But if you can avoid it and see this movie without that, well done. Psycho is one of those movies where you want to go back and rewatch it over and over again, because there are so many layers to it. There's so many hints about what's going to come. There's so many imagery and clues, which even when you know the whole movie from start to finish and you go to watch it again, watching the performances by the bad people in this movie, watching the attempts to solve one mystery, get caught up in another, attempt to hide, to save your own life, whatever, it's unnerving and it's creepy to a point where you leave having watched Psycho and you go to sleep and you're kept up at night, but you're not kept up at night because you think that someone's going to burst in and stab you. You're kept up because you're thinking, is anybody thinking about me? Is there anybody out there doing this to anyone at all? What is the type of person that has to be in that situation where they would commit the crimes that they do? Is it safe to trust anyone? Incredible stuff. Moving on then, we jump forward. Again, this is a movie that's on my bucket list. It's really been helpful. I want to thank Oliver again for telling me, well, giving me the poster essentially, because I never would have watched these movies without that help. I like to talk a good game, but, you know, in the end, I'm just all about the superheroes, I guess. Anyway, moving on. 1975, I think. I want to talk about Halloween, or the birth of the slasher movie. Now, we've got tons of slasher movies these days. You've got all the different Saw films. You've got movies where people go to a house and someone's killing everybody and they run around stabbing people. But we've upped it since then. Then you've got people falling into pits of barbed wire. You've got people running into walls with hooks on them. You've got people cutting their arms off and then accidentally slapping someone else with the arm. You've got people whose eyes pop out of their head. I hate it. That's sort of gory stuff that's just screaming over the top. I can't handle it. It all really comes from Halloween, essentially. Halloween set up the basic premise, which is, again, there is a killer in this small town, and all he's really doing is he's escaped from a mental asylum, he's come to town, and he's just going to roam around and kill as many people as he can until he's either stopped or he wins. And Jamie Lee Curtis is our main actress of the movie. She has to avoid the killer, try and save herself, try and save others if she can, and outwit him to a point. And that's what these slasher movies normally entail. There's always that one person that's just able to outthink the bad guy, but there's always an essence of a supernatural involved. You look back on it now and you do maybe laugh a little bit because perhaps it hasn't aged particularly well. When I bought the DVD, it says on the front that it's the scariest movie you'll ever watch. Yes and no, and I think that's interesting. It's scary in the essence that I want it to be scary. It's unsettling, it's unnerving, it's spooky. It's not scary as in you're going to go, every 5 seconds because Michael Myers is going to jump out from every alleyway and every bush with a knife in hand to kill the person that you are watching on the screen. You look back on it and a lot of the movie is shot from Michael Myers' perspective. He's just walking around watching people. The comedy does come from a bit where he's clearly behind someone, but when they turn around, he's gone. And then they look to see where he could have gone and he's disappeared. Because in my mind, it just sounds like he's just quickly hightailed it out of there as fast as his little legs can carry him. But I think in essence of that, the movie really excels at that unknown person. As I'm sitting here and I'm talking about Michael Myers and the way he's watching everybody, it is unnerving because I'm sitting here in my little recording room and I don't know, is anyone watching me? Has anyone been watching my house? When I go down to the shops to get my groceries and my mail and walk back, has someone noticed that I've been doing that? Are they following along behind me? Do I know? Is anyone following me when I go to see my friends? It's very spooky. Just the idea that you are not alone. So while Halloween gave birth to the slasher movie, and we do get our slashers, they're not over the top. It's just knives, really. People get stabbed, but they don't burst into fountains of blood. There's screaming, but there's not too much screaming. I watched the movie on a Sunday afternoon with the blinds open because I didn't want to be jump scared. I did not get jump scared, and that's impressive. So I think we're getting the basis, aren't we? Which is that movies that make you think, that stick with you, that give you an uneasy lump in your throat, that make you go away with your skin crawling, not walking away with your head ache because someone's just gone boo right in your face. But why? Why am I talking about Halloween food movies? What started this all, essentially? And no, it wasn't the bucket list, really. It was what made me open to it. This one movie that really went, okay, maybe horror, there's more to horror films than I realized. And that's the movie Get Out, which came out in 2017, directed by Jordan Peele. That is a horror movie in the basic sense of a horror movie that we're used to, but it's absolutely a horror film in the themes and the story and the atmosphere that we watch. Once again, I have to hats off to my friends who forced me to sit down and watch it. I appreciate that they did that. Little side note, no, that does not give you the right to make me watch a jump scare movie. Don't lure me into a trap. I know you're thinking of doing that. I won't have it. Get Out, a basic summary, because this is a movie that definitely needs to be experienced. Jordan Peele plays a young man who goes to the hometown of his girlfriend to meet her parents. There's something off about the town, which we basically put down to racial tension of sorts. There's a lot more going on to it than that. Something is happening in this town. Something is happening to people. People are behaving strange. And it is unnerving and shocking when you figure out what's going on and whether Daniel Kaluuya. Jordan Peele directs, Daniel Kaluuya stars. Daniel Kaluuya, when he figures out what's going on. Apologies for that faux pas. But welcome to Spliced In Later. We faux pas all over the place. What's so scary about Get Out? Is it the one jump scare in the movie? There is in fact one jump scare, and I will allow it because it is relevant to setting up the atmosphere of the story. Get Out is unnerving because of the portrayals, the subtle mannerisms of each character we interact with in this movie. As Daniel Kaluuya is walking around, he's talking to people, the way they speak to him, their mannerisms is unsettling. And some actors in here pull off the perfect facial expressions where they look normal and they're in a public setting, so no one would catch on, but you look into their eyes and there is a sense of fear, of panic, of dread, of utter terror that sticks with you long after you've seen the movie. You lie asleep at night and you close your eyes and you see this woman with her eyes wide with shock, or you see one of the most impressive moments in acting ever where a guy gets flashed by a camera light and goes from happy to downright horribly upset and petrified with just the most briefest facial expressions. Get Out is great because it is unique. It is something new. Yet it goes back to the way that Halloween films were before the slash fest that we're getting today. And when I say Halloween films, I mean horror films. If I've said in the past Halloween films by accident, another faux pas. But we're not going back, we're pushing forward. Horror films. Get Out was the first horror film that I went out and I bought because I enjoyed it that much. And since then, it has been a cautious look. I do attempt a horror film if I can figure out for certain that it's not a jump scare fest, or if it is a jump scare fest, it's relevant to the plot. Since then, I've seen movies like Psycho and Halloween, but also Alien. And there's still so many to see. My next goal, I believe, is to watch John Carpenter's The Thing. That's going to be an interesting experience. I've been working up the courage to watch that for many months, but I think I'll enjoy it. The moral of this episode is, as much as I do my little asides and say horror films are terrible and I hate them, I have to allow the fact that some horror films are good because of what they are. In every 20 horror films where it's just stab, stab, jump scare, there is one horror film that's intriguing, that's unnerving, that's unsettling, that makes you think. And that's the stuff that I like, and I hope that that's the stuff you like too. If you're listening on YouTube and you've got some horror films you want to recommend to me, and it's not a trap, feel free to comment in the section and let me know. If you're listening on Spotify, you can't do that, as I've said before. But have a think. Are there horror films that you like? Why do you like them? Do you like the scream fest? Do you like the jump scares? Am I wrong? Maybe. I hope not. Or are you like me and you like the unsettling, creepy stuff where it's fear for unsettling, not startled adrenaline rush? It makes you think. Stew on that for a week. I know I'm going to. And we'll be back next week with another episode of Spliced In Later movie stuff. I don't know what it will be. I'm going to bring a review to you soon. I'll review a movie that's been released on video on demand, so we can talk about that, and we can talk about how the film world is coping with having to either release movies on video on demand and streaming services, or just refusing to release them until the crisis has passed. Be an interesting discussion, but not for a couple of weeks. I've got to wait for this movie to particularly be released, but keep an eye out for that. Until then, I love and appreciate you as always. Thank you once again for listening. You've been Spliced In Later. Adios, muchachos. I'll catch you next time.